Welcome to the Dark Ascent Podcast, where we enter into the deepest secrets of black magic and the left-hand path. This is episode 3, the Intersection of the Worlds. To learn more about our work, please visit darkascent.org. Hi everyone, thank you for listening. And I am your host, Melektoth, and I'm here with my wife, Elinara.
Hello.
And today we are talking about what I'm calling the intersection of the worlds. And what I mean by that is basically how magic works. So I will tell you that I am quite a skeptical person. Like, really skeptical.
Tell me about it.
Yeah.
We've argued about, skepticism before.
Yeah.
And it always drove me crazy how skeptical you were.
I know. And, even, when I came across the law of attraction and I started experiencing that in my life, it took me a good while to really admit to myself that something was really happening. There was a lot of time where I kind of thought, well, maybe I'm imagining it, maybe it's placebo, or maybe it's just, confirmation bias or something like that. Eventually I did admit it to myself because it was just too reliable, too predictable. And so, I had to admit that it was a real phenomenon, but it really took a while to overcome that skepticism. And so, it's hard, especially with something like magic, which is so out there, really.
Yeah.
In the 21st century, people say we just don't have magic anymore. Science explains everything, and
I feel like it's kind of a curse sometimes, or it's a both and, because science can be a great thing, but then it's like, it explains too much almost.
Right, exactly. And, so the things that were once explained by gods, per se, are not anymore, because now we have the scientific explanations.
Exactly.
We know that Zeus isn't throwing lightning bolts. We know that, electrical phenomena are happening. And so, magic seems to not really have a place. And so a lot of people are skeptical of magic. Now, for some reason, a lot of people aren't as skeptical of the law of attraction as they are of magic. I think because the law of attraction has sort of gained more popularity in the world, I guess.
Well, it doesn't help, too, that celebrities do it.
Yeah.
So, when celebrities do, it's like, oh, anyone can do it.
Right.
Because celebrities can do it.
And it's especially after The Secret came out in 2005, I think. It just gained pretty widespread popularity. So, a lot of people believe we can create our own reality, but it's sort of this very general, very vague sort of, if I think positively, good things will happen. It's not this very specific, I can wield forces to bring exactly what I want into my life. That for some people gets a little uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So, and that's magic, right? And I claim that the law of attraction is also magic. It's just that people don't really see it that way, or they see it in a different light, but it really is magic. So the question is, how does this magic happen? Because in your everyday life, it seems like there's not really room for magic. You get up in the morning, maybe you go to work, or you do whatever it is you do as a job.
Or you do nothing.
Or nothing if you choose. But, you're in the world, you're out in traffic, you're in an office, you're whatever you do. And it just, magical things just don't happen. In fact, a lot of people, a lot of religious people, will say they pray to God for something, but they always say that God doesn't really answer, that God doesn't really speak to them or whatever. And people who think that God speaks to them are seen as sort of crazy, right?
Yep.
So it's sort of, we have this rejection of it because it's just, we're in this mundane reality. Okay, so there doesn't seem to be room for magic. And then when you do have, let's say a tarot reader, let's say a psychic, skeptics will say, well, it's just confirmation bias, or they're just cold reading, or whatever. So there's just, we explain away so much. And I know for me, especially as I started to get into black magic in particular, my mind tried to explain away a lot of the experiences I was having. Like, was that really a demon talking to me, or was that just my own mind? You know, was that really a magical experience, or was it just chemicals in my body? You know what I mean? Like, just an experience in my body that's just scientific. And so it's easy to explain these things away. So when I talk about the intersection of the worlds, I'm talking about, between the mundane world and the magical world. Or we have another name for this. So between the physical world, which is the mundane, and the astral world. Okay, now some people may have heard the word astral before, the astral plane. You might have heard of astral projection, out-of-body experiences, and things like that. The astral plane is actually one of many planes, but this is the one we'll talk about. The astral plane is the plane where magic happens. And it's a plane of existence that lies very close to the physical, but which is a bit more, it has a higher vibration. Okay, so the astral plane, in some senses, will mimic the physical. You can go into the astral version of your city or your house or whatever and see the same sorts of things. But as you go higher up into the plane, then it will start to look different. Things will start to change. And there are actually entities that live on the astral plane. Besides, things like demons and angels and so on, there are actually just native astral beings that have nothing to do with us whatsoever. But the astral plane is the plane of emotions, the plane of desire, the plane of magic, because that's really where all desires are born. So the question is, how do we reconcile these two planes of existence? How do we reconcile the physical with the astral? And why does that matter? It matters because if you are just locked in the physical, then you can't do magic. If you're just locked in the physical, then everything you see is already manifested and you have no effect on it. Now, that is the traditional scientific view of things.
Yep.
Is that we are physical beings in a physical universe, completely separate, and we have no influence on anything besides through our physical actions. And maybe our words and such, but, if we speak to someone else. But through our actions, our words, and so on, that's the only way we can influence reality, but not through any other means, not through our minds or so on. So if we are just locked in this physical plane of existence, that is what would be true. But if you can bridge the gap between the physical and the astral, then you can do magic. Because on the astral, the moment you desire something, it comes into existence on that plane.
That is so cool. Sometimes I wish you lived on the astral.
I know. The moment you think about something, the moment you want to be somewhere, you're there. It's just everything's instant. So, and the astral can seem very, well, it is magical, but it can seem very kind of like a fairy tale or something, like, oh, it seems very imaginary or whatever. Mm-hmm. But there are people who have done real studies where, they enter into an astral projection, which means they literally, their astral form leaves their physical body. And they'll do a test. A popular one is they'll take an index, or they'll take a card and tape it face down to a window so they can never see it, okay, with their physical eyes. And then they'll go into an astral projection, leaving their body, travel outside the window, and look at the card, see what it is, and then come back into their body. And people who have done this experiment, it's not an experiment I've done, but I've read a lot about it, but people who have done this experiment are very, very, very highly accurate, almost always correct, depends on the person. So, like, higher than would be random chance, way higher, almost 100%. So this, is a real phenomenon that happens. So if you can bridge that gap between the physical and the astral, then you can do magic. Then you can influence the world. Then you can control things with your mind, with your emotions, with your desires. And that's what really the law of attraction relies upon. That's what magic relies upon. Any sort of idea that you can influence the reality around you with your thoughts relies on this ability to bridge the gap between the physical and the astral. Okay, so this is a really important thing. So we have to see, where do the worlds intersect? Where do the worlds come the closest? How do we bridge that gap so that we can do magic? Because what a lot of, say, law of attraction teachers will tell you and resources will tell you is basically just to think positively and just to, imagine the things you want and so on. And this will have some effect, but if you just do that in your normal day-to-day consciousness, you are going to be just in the physical, right? When you're just in a normal state of consciousness, you are very much in the physical. And so your thoughts don't have that much influence, not as much as if you were to follow what I'll be saying later and bridge that gap between the physical and the astral. So, just thinking positively, and people have tried this, and it has some effect on the things that are most easily accomplished and the things that are most easily achieved, that you believe in the most. But for the bigger things, for things that really matter to you, you just can't get there just through normal everyday consciousness, because you're just too much in the physical. You're too much in the manifest reality to really have any effect. So these intersections, this is actually something I realized recently and in a fuller way, and it really changed the way I saw magic when I saw this. These intersections are places where the physical world is more easily manipulated, okay? And where your own experience is more easily manipulated, is more easily influenced. So here's what I mean. In your everyday world, you pretty much see what you see. I mean, philosophically speaking, we never know if what we see is really objective reality or not, but we kind of assume it is, right? But that's the objective universe I talked about last week. And your subjective universe is, as I said, your imagination, your emotions, your desires, and so on and so forth. But when you're in your everyday world, you're very much in the objective universe. But magic happens where the subjective universe is strongest. So let me give an example. A while ago, I was really into these really creepy stories. There's a subreddit on Reddit called Glitch in the Matrix. And so there would be these stories about experiences that people would have that defied explanation, and they were kind of creepy.
Some of them were.
Yeah. And so these experiences, it would be things like, someone who's on a long road trip. These are the creepiest for me. Someone who's on a long road trip and stops at a random restaurant or gas station or something like that, and everyone is dressed really weird and everyone's acting really weird, and they walk in and everyone just sort of stares at the newcomer, and then they leave, after doing whatever they had to do there, eating or getting gas or whatever, and on the way back they try to find that same place and it's gone, right? It's like it only existed for them in that moment. So that's a really popular example. But just experiences like these that kind of defy explanation.
One of them was a whole town.
Yeah, that's right.
And it was just gone.
Yeah.
Creepy.
But what I started to notice as I read these stories was that there were certain conditions that were always present when people had these experiences. They were almost always alone or in a very small group, like maybe they had one other person with them that could corroborate their experience. It was almost always either at night or in a very secluded area. If you're on a long road trip, there's not much civilization around all the time. There's long stretches of road where there's nothing. So you're very much secluded. And it's something that, when you try to explain it to someone else, the actual phenomenon just disappears. Okay? So, when they go back and try to find it later or find it on a map, it's not there. So it's these things that, when the person is sort of not all the way in their objective universe, sort of, a bit more in their subjective universe, a bit more in their own thoughts and emotions. And
which driving can do.
Yeah, yeah.
Because you're staring at a long stretch of road.
Exactly.
And you're kind of like hypnotized,
right.
sort of.
And So when these conditions are present, then these weird experiences can happen because, you're sort of in this alternate reality almost, this altered state of consciousness where different things can happen. You can think you see certain things, you can think you hear certain things, you can think you feel certain things. And, it's just like a lot of paranormal experiences happen, like, say, out in the forest or out, when someone's out camping or, things like that, like just secluded, right? I'm not saying that's necessarily always has to be that way, but it just tends to be. Mm-hmm. Okay, so these certain conditions that seem to be present that make sure that that person is more open to their subjective experience. And, these conditions, like I said, seem always to be present pretty much, more or less. So these are the sorts of situations where the worlds are the closest. Imagine at nighttime in the dark. Why are people afraid of the dark? Because it's like during the daytime, things that we were afraid of at night seem to be silly. But at night, especially like, let's say you're alone at night, you can have all sorts of weird thoughts and imaginings and think you see something or think you hear something or whatever.
And that's when, like, you tell your ghost stories.
Right, exactly. Why do people tell ghost stories around a campfire at night? But this is when you have those experiences. Who has paranormal experiences during the day? Not very many people. I've heard of it sometimes, but not very many people.
And I've had them at night, but not during the day.
Right. At night is sort of when you're more susceptible to it. You're tired. It's dark. It just seems like it's more susceptible to those sorts of things. So that's another example of that, when it's dark and you're alone or whatever.
It's just weird, like, doing rituals during the daytime, I feel like.
Yeah, people do it, but yeah.
Yeah.
So another example, this isn't exactly paranormal, but it's a similar example. Let's say you go and watch a movie. Okay, it doesn't matter if it's a creepy movie or any kind of movie, but you get caught up in the emotions of it. Now, in your everyday consciousness, like, it wouldn't influence you as much. If you remember it later on and you just talk about what happened in the movie and it's like, okay, well, yeah, that happened. But in the midst of it, it seems like especially some of the more impactful movies, it seems like one of the most important things.
And you forget that you're watching it.
Yeah, you get
it's
sucked up in it.
It's the same with books, too.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's like, wait, this character isn't real, but
right.
You think the character is real.
Right. Another example is like over the holidays. Let's say Christmas, and we have this whole thing about, holiday cheer and everyone's happier and more giving. And so you have these Christmas movies and you get sucked up into this sort of spirit of the holidays, which obviously just passed recently. But you get sucked up in the spirit of the holidays and it's almost its own entity of sorts. It's almost its own reality.
It really is.
So these are some experiences of what I mean when I say that we have these subjective experiences, and sometimes they're the strongest when we're watching a movie or reading a book, when it's in the holiday season, when it's at nighttime and we're scared of something, we're having random thoughts. We wake up at 3 a.m. and we have all these thoughts going through our heads. That is when our subjective universe is the strongest and the objective one is the weakest.
Yep.
So if we can take advantage of those times, if we can actually replicate those times, then we can do magic. So here's another few examples going off of some other things. Okay, so let's take tarot readings. Okay, tarot readings, objectively speaking, all you're doing is you're taking a deck of cards and you're shuffling them, and then you are imagining that the cards you pull have significance for the person you're reading. Now, why should they have significance? Who knows? Because you say so, pretty much, right? How do the cards know, like, what position means what? Well, because you choose beforehand. I'm going to do this card spread. I'm going to, pull 10 cards, and the first card means that, and the second card means that, and so on and so forth. But it's all a very subjective experience, isn't it? I mean, you could just pull 10 cards at random and just say, okay, well, here's this card and this card and this card, and it's just cards. They're objectively just cards. But because you imagine subjective universe, that these 10 cards, or however many you pull, that these cards have meaning, then you can take that meaning and explain someone else's life, right? Just like, let's say, reading tea leaves. You have a cup of tea and you drink the tea, and then you look in and you see what patterns the tea leaves make, and you just sort of see what comes up in mind. Someone else might see just blobs, just nothing, just random data. But you, if you're looking for it and you're open, can see something totally different. So divination is a really good example of where this takes place, where this happens. Okay, so any kind of random data, if you look into a flame, you'll see certain experiences, you'll see certain images. Sometimes you can, scrying is a thing. You can scry into a mirror or into a flame or into water, whatever. The experience of evocation, which I haven't really talked about yet, but calling on a spirit, you get them to manifest in a medium that is more easily influenced, like a flame or like mist or smoke, incense smoke or something like that. Because smoke, you can sort of see things in it sometimes, just like, when you look at the clouds and you can see images in the clouds, and very subjective. So magic plays on the subjective. Does that mean it's false or wrong? No. We have to get over this idea that the subjective universe is just imaginary. Like everything going on in our head is just imaginary. It's not.
And we have to remember that our bodies, even though they might seem physical, are really just made of energy.
Right.
They're really subjective, right?
Right. Yep. Mm-hmm. Right. So our experiences, our thoughts, things going on in our head, yes, they're subjective, meaning that they are based on personal experience. They are based on our own consciousness. But that does not mean that they're false at all. So when you deny your own subjective experience, you are literally shutting down the channel of magic. Because if you don't allow for subjective experience to come through, then nothing can happen. Look, you will never have an experience. Like, a lot of times atheists will say, yeah, I'll believe something else exists if a being, a spiritual being or God or something appears to me in physical form. And it's like, well, then you could just say it's a hallucination, right? What does that mean? So, but you will never have an experience where something materializes in front of you. A demon literally physically materializes in front of you and touches you on the shoulder or speaks to you out loud in a real physical body. That's just not going to happen. Why? Because those are objective universe experiences. And demons, who are astral beings of the subjective universe, cannot fully manifest in the objective universe. They can influence it. They can, push things here or there, but they cannot fully manifest. Because the subjective universe and the objective universe are separate experiences, separate universes. The astral and the physical are separate planes.
Is that why some people, because you see the stories about how like a mysterious person came and healed somebody, or an angel, like,
yeah.
Is that like, because they look and feel real to the person that sees them?
I find a lot of times that happens, and then later on, the person thinks back and thinks, wait, did that really happen? There's this sort of unreality about a magical experience, right? So you sort of almost doubt yourself. And that's the other thing that happens with these glitches, with these weird experiences, is that you almost are led to doubt in it. Like, the objective universe doesn't seem to want you to believe in it, right? And so people will have these experiences and say, I started doubting it like right afterwards, even though I remember it really clearly. And that's a very common thing for some reason. And I think it's because, again, the objective universe seeks to realign everything to be in order with itself. So when you have this phenomenon that is outside of the norm, it seeks to sort of explain it away with a wave of the hand.
You can't always.
Right. So as I was saying, you know, spiritual beings, demons, angels, whatever, cannot just come and fully manifest on the physical, at least not very easily. And so you're not going to have, as much as you want it, you're not going to have an experience where a being steps out and is in a physical body and touches you or something, or speaks to you or whatever. That's just not going to happen. You have to become more attuned to the subjective so that you can experience them.
And you have to trust in your experience.
And you have to trust in your experience. So that's what I mean about realizing the things going on in your head is not actually just in your head. It's actually in your subjective universe, or it's on the astral, to use another term. So that is where magic happens. Magic doesn't happen when you're out driving in traffic or when you're in the office with a whole bunch of people around. You know, you always have, like, I really like fantasy books, and one of the types of books I really like is called urban fantasy.
Me too.
Where it kind of happens in the midst of, you know, modern day reality.
Yeah.
But some of them will have, like, oh yeah, the person's at work and this big monster comes crashing in and kills everyone. That's just never going to happen because it would influence too many people's objective experience, right? You can't just do that. But if someone's sitting alone at work, if someone's alone in the office late at night and there are just a few lights on, that's another place you hear of paranormal experiences or creepy experiences. Then the monster, so to speak, or the demon or the spirit or the weird, creepy creature can, you know, or whatever experience it might be, can influence your experience because it's just your subjective universe. So, you know, that is how magic comes into our world. It doesn't come into our world just crashing into our reality. You know, you're not going to just snap your fingers and money manifest before you, or some kind of physical object, or, you know, it has to come through the subjective universe and then subtly influence the objective universe through various means.
Haven't some people actually manifested physical things, though? I've heard of it.
Well, this is again one of those things where it's hearsay, right? I mean, we hear that this has happened, but it's sort of, you have to take someone's word for it. And did it really happen? Who knows? And the objective universe is going to try to explain it away. And, you know, you'd have to actually be there and experience it. I don't know. I'm sure maybe it has, but it's like people who are really masters of energy and of magic and of the reality around them. Sure, perhaps. But, you know, with these sorts of things, you will never have the experience where you can prove it beyond a shadow of a doubt to a skeptic. Because, you know, such a person just is not open in their subjective reality and their subjective universe to have that sort of experience. They're just not open to it. Okay. So these intersections, as I said, they are things like, you know, thoughts happening in your mind. They're things like a flame that you can see things in, water that you can see things in, tea leaves.
What about like chanting? Can that get you there?
Yeah, there are things that can get you there, for sure. It's like an altered state of consciousness, right? But again, you want to have kind of props that will help you get there. So you're probably not going to do it in the middle of the day, let's say in your living room where your family is.
Right.
You're probably not going to sit down and draw a circle, get out your ritual altar, and start chanting, because it's like there's too much of a conflict between your subjective universe that you're trying to create and the subjective universes of everyone else in that area.
Yep.
Like, you're probably not going to do that. You're probably going to go into the dark basement or into a dark room, turn out the lights perhaps, or light some candles, and do all those things.
Oh, yeah. Unless, like, everyone's there for that ritual, which happens.
Right, well, yeah. But, you know, yeah, if everyone is agreeing on that, then that's great. But, you know, it would be too much of a conflict if everyone else is just like watching TV and you just come in and start doing a ritual or something.
Could you imagine?
It's just not going to happen. That's just not going to work. So you're going to have props. You're going to have things in the environment. You might even go outside at night into the forest or, you know, something like that, into your backyard or something.
Have woods.
Yeah, I know, right behind our house. Or you're going to go into the basement. That's actually where our ritual space is, in our basement. And, you know, light some incense, light some candles or whatever. And that's going to be your ritual space. So as a black magician, your job is to create a space that joins the worlds. You're creating a space in between the worlds, quite literally. Like, you can't just walk in there in your everyday consciousness and say, all right, I want more money, and walk out and expect it to happen. Not going to work. Not going to work. But, you might put on a ritual robe. You don't have to. Lots of people do it in their regular clothes, but, you might prepare in some way, and then you go in, and then you center yourself, and you maybe light some candles, and you turn on the lights, and, it's in a place that is set aside for this purpose. So it's a very special place. Maybe you wear certain clothes for it. Maybe you don't. Maybe you have certain smells associated, or certain sights associated, or certain sounds associated with this space. And the more you use that space for magic, the more it becomes a temple for working magic. But you're intentionally creating a space in between the worlds where you can interact with the forces of the astral, of the subjective universe, and also send them into the objective universe, into the physical. Okay? So that is what you're trying to do in a magical working. And that is why that happens. That is why you do that. You don't just think positively and, try to feel better and so on. And that will have, like I said, some effect. But if you're not intersecting the world, so to speak, if you're not joining the worlds in some way, kind of bridging that gap, then your influence is a lot weaker. Much, much weaker. Now, eventually, some people can do all this without the ritual props, but some people try to start there. Like, yeah, I can just, say something or imagine it or whatever, and it'll happen. It probably won't. You probably are going to have to start with a ritual. Some people will eventually, once they're really good at ritual, they get the state of consciousness down, so they enter into an altered state of consciousness. And in fact, I have gotten pretty good at doing this, where I can enter an altered state of consciousness. It takes me, maybe 30 seconds to do so, and then I can put my will out there and send it out into the universe and have a pretty high confidence that it's going to happen. But even if, for me, I will still do, let's say, an evocation of a certain demon, or I will do a ritual for a certain purpose if it's something big, or let's say I want to talk to a certain spirit. I can talk to a lot of spirits if I have a relationship with them in my everyday reality. But if I have a really important thing I want to discuss, then I will do an all-out evocation. I may even do a temporary possession, which is a topic we can talk about at a later date, and speak to that spirit and say, this is what I have going on, and what do you suggest? What should I do? Whatever. And so they can help me in that way. And also, an all-out evocation, if you're trying to get a goal of some sort, will feed more energy into that spirit to give them the power to influence your realities. Because I'm not going to go too much into it. It's a little bit of a contract. This is another podcast topic, but you sort of have to give the spirit permission and energy to work in your life. And so just saying, hey, spirit I've never worked with before, would you please give me lots of money, thank you, is probably not going to work. So you can't just, ask a random spirit to do something in your everyday consciousness and expect it to be done. It could maybe possibly happen, but I really, really doubt it. So you're going to communicate with them, you're going to evoke them, and then give them the power to do what you want them to do. Okay, or even if you're not dealing with a spirit, even if you're just dealing with regular magic on your own, doing a spell of sorts, you still might need to build up the energy, because another thing ritual is good for is building up energy.
Oh, yeah.
But again, that's another topic for another day. But the main thing, or the first thing that a ritual is good for, is bridging that gap into the subjective universe, into the astral. So that is why that's so needed. And that's one thing I realized, because for a long time I was like LOA only, like exclusively LOA, law of attraction. I would say, that the law of attraction is all you need. You don't need silly rituals and so on and so forth. Those are just antiquated. And because there was a point I got pretty good at doing everything I wanted to do just with the law of attraction. I got pretty good at it,
Yeah,
right?
you did.
But there are still times where a ritual is really needed. And, honestly, I think they're also kind of nourishing, because when you're just sort of stuck in the objective universe all day, you sort of start to feel disconnected. So, sure, maybe you can get by just by doing a little mental focusing and getting something with the law of attraction. But it's a lot more nourishing when you actually connect, when you actually get into ritual and call on these forces and call up this energy and immerse yourself in the subjective universe. It's a lot more nourishing and you feel a lot more connected. And so, even spiritually speaking, that can really help you. So, that is why you would want to do that. And again, I spent a long time not really seeing the point, but eventually I started to. And a lot of it is, I didn't know how to create a good ritual. Like, a lot of it just seemed random and without any kind of point to it. But a ritual is a very subjective thing. There's not like, okay, have this specific kind of herb and that specific tool and that crystal, and that will get you what you want. There is a little bit of that just from things that magicians have agreed upon over the centuries. But most of it is just your subjective experience, what makes you feel like this is a special experience. Yeah. So that is what makes up a ritual. But again, just to sort of summarize what we were saying, the intersection between the worlds, the intersection of the worlds is where your subjective universe is the strongest, where your personal experience can be the most influenced without necessarily affecting other people's experiences, because they may not, agree to be in that experience, or they might not be open to that experience. So again, things like at night in the dark, in an isolated space, something like that. These are all things where your subjective universe is strongest. And so when you can create that sort of space, that sort of intersection, that sort of place where, maybe it was real, maybe it wasn't, but as a magician that it really was, that is where you can really do magic. Okay, so this is a complicated topic, again, because there's never going to be a time where you can explain to a skeptic, magic is real, let me show you how. I've heard of people who have tried to let a friend sit in on a ritual who was, skeptical or who was unfamiliar with all this stuff. Really, really bad decision there. Because if you let someone sit in on your ritual, a few things might happen. Number one, they'll influence it from their own disbelief or from their own thoughts and feelings. Number two, they won't experience anything, and then they'll cause you to doubt. And number three, you won't be able to let go fully into your own subjective universe, because now you're trying to show off for someone else, or you're trying to, prove to someone else that your experience is real. And this is why I tell people, like, don't tell someone when you're working on some goal, when you're working on some magical experience or goal or working of some sort, don't tell anyone, because they will influence you, they'll cause you to doubt. And, again, the objective universe wants you to doubt because your experiences are literally changing reality, which is totally unnatural, right? And that's just not what the objective universe wants to happen. So hopefully that clarifies for you how these things work, how the worlds intersect, how you can bridge that gap. I mean, this is just the very, very, very basics, but hopefully that will explain for you how this all fits together. And I will go into further detail in future podcasts into some of the other components of magic and ritual and things like that, but this is just the very basics of how it all works. So I do hope that you enjoyed our podcast today. If you want to see the show notes or leave a comment on our podcast, you can go to darkascent.org DA003. And if you'd like to subscribe to our podcast, that would be awesome. You can subscribe to us on iTunes or Stitcher or Google Play. I believe those are the places we are. So you can go and subscribe to us, and that'd be awesome. We are here every Friday now. We've decided to do weekly podcasts because we're having so much fun with it.
Yes.
So, feel free to join us, to subscribe to us and join us every Friday. We'll be here next Friday again for another episode of the Dark Ascent Podcast. Thank you once again, everyone, for listening, and we will see you next week. Bye, everyone.
Have a great day. Thank you.